Good morning, everybody, again. It's my great pleasure to welcome you here again on the second day. I was watching you the last 2 minutes when he was talking. Nobody was yawning, so that's great. I hope this is not just because you're still in your jet lag time, but because you're really interested. And I have the impression that we posed many questions, touched big issues yesterday. We've laid out sort of the landscape of what the various challenges are ahead, and I mean, Dirk already said it. I think what our task should be today, and then for those who are staying even tomorrow, to focus it and maybe receive some more detailed discussion and in-depth reflections on the kind of issues we think are most relevant. Actually, this panel in the morning is supposed to give a kickstart to the next session of working groups. So what we will do, we will hopefully build on something that has been raised yesterday, but also give some new ideas and some fresh thoughts to the second phase of the working groups. And as you have noticed yesterday, we've tried to do that most interactive during the day with these best practice examples, and already in the plenary in the morning with the small groups discussing and posing the questions in the plenary here. So that's why we decided, I'm very happy that we decided to do it in a co-moderation together with Shefali. So Shefali and myself, we're going to moderate that panel and hope that it's going to be an even more interactive debate. And we will start here on the panel, but then open it up to you, of course, because I guess not many of you can add to what we're discussing here. Candido, I would love to start with you. Just to remind you, Candido from the Brazilian Institute for the Analysis of Social and Economic Affairs, right? Can you say the correct name once more, please?
Brazilian Institute for Social and Economic
Analysis. Okay, analysis, that's right.
We are not doing business.
Not yet. Candido, if you look up the word strategy, it says it's something where you have a concrete goal that you want to reach, and then from there you go back and define the steps how to get there. Now, we have posed many challenges yesterday and thrown out big questions, but maybe you want to give us something on the perspective that where we are heading so that we can define back from there our strategies.
Thank you. It's a hard task because it's nearly impossible to say somebody has the solution. It's a collective task, but we must try to put our ideas to dialogue and improve these ideas together, because it's a common task to change the world. I think the first task for that is to establish what kind of transformation we need, because it's not adaptation of the system, it's not reforming the system. The foundation of the system are no more working. It's a problem of crisis civilization. So we need to look the foundation of this civilization and establish new foundations. And this is also a common task. We must reflect a lot, exchange a lot, and inspire ourselves in the real problems people, concrete communities, indigenous people, peasants, shantytown people are facing to develop their lives. I personally propose a kind of way of working. It's not a model to arrive, but is a starting point and guidelines for working. I'm talking about an idea of bio-civilization, different because life is diverse in the planet. So different solution, bio-civilization this way, that is possible to establish in different parts of the planet. But what I mean by biocivilization, I mean reestablishing the foundation. One of the main foundations is the break between human beings and other biosphere, living beings, and the planet and the nature. So reestablish this, thinking us as part of nature, part of the life, like the indigenous people using this idea of well-living, bem viver, bien vivir in our region. Is not the only idea, but I'm taking our ideas there, is like establishing what must be our relation together. We are part of this. And this idea of biocivilization is reestablishing this. And this it means that fundamental for life is, for example, care. And care in our society is something at home. It's for women. And because of that, we put out as not important, but it's fundamental. Because it's where we care our children, our elders, everything. We do our food, we have life, we share life, we love everything that is fundamental. But this is not economy in the dominant vision. The economy, coming from Greek, means how to manage home. So let's inspire ourselves in care. Care means not to produce something that must finish in 2 years, but it's to produce for using until it's possible. This is care. Yes, not our economy. We change cars. The model of this economy today is the car. That nearly passed by one colleague coming to here 10 minutes ago. Is private, is not common. The second idea is how to improve the commons, because in home we have a common life. How to improve the commons around all society. But how to do these things? It's common. Nothing is common by itself. It's common in our relation with them. We must reestablish this kind of principles. Also the idea of sharing. Privatization of everything, and mainly of knowledge, for example. Nature and knowledge is a fundamental risk for sustainability. We must be against this, commoning everything that must be common. And I can go further on that, and because it's a starting discussion. IBAS has organized in preparation to Rio +20 last year a conference proposing this kind of discussion. Say maybe we can start seeing where there are the principles, but by a fundamental strategic point. Mm-hmm. And how to build this without killing ourselves. Mm-hmm. So, radical democracy is a fundamental method for doing this. For doing in peace is because it's a dispute. We are disputing with big corporations, with people controlling the power. We are disputing how to do this dispute in a radical democratic way.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for this great and big picture intro. I think it takes, yesterday I was referring to Karl Polanyi and the idea of re-embedding the economy within societal values. But as I can see, this idea of biocivilization takes it even one more step further, because it's not only about re-embedding the economy within society, but also re-embedding society within the larger biosphere and the other human beings, with the principles caring and commenting and sharing. Can you maybe give us more concrete examples what, with that vision in mind, what kind of actual struggles or concrete projects or ideas can take us there, maybe from your Brazilian background? So what is something that we can do with this vision in mind, or what other people are already doing?
So, maybe we must look to the concrete struggles. There are today like a crisis because the people looking only for social justice are in the end supporting development. As in my country, as the example by China, there are a lot of these emerging countries are the best example that have a strong support in some sectors of people that all used to be excluded and today are supporting. But social justice without sustainability is not social justice. It's like rebuilding inequality in society and exclusion. This kind of civilization we live, to have emerging countries, to have power, others must lose, is not place for everybody. It's for place for some. This is the history of this civilization. So let's look, what are the real struggles with this potential? Yesterday in our group, Danielle from Greenpeace remind us about the struggles around land. I prefer to say, in this perspective of biocivilization, territories dispute around territories, because it's a common territory. Land is seen by the business, by the corporations, by the state, but for the people, it's where they live. The indigenous people, they think, is a territory, our water, our trees, our cemetery, our church, our land to plant, and so on. It's not a single issue, this. And the dispute around mining, around energy, dams, or producing agribusiness, producing fuel, or also kind of food they produce, or all this is in the center of these disputes today. But these disputes are locally. Everyone, because there's a concrete territory, is in dispute. Can be in our region, for example, Belo Monte around the big dam, or Tupnis in Bolivia, the indigenous area where the Brazil is supporting to build our government with our bank is supporting to build a big road for exploring the land. Yeah. So how to link all this and extract all these struggles in Africa, in Asia, and everywhere, in Canada, in the United States, and see is like the blooming of new kind of vision, new kind of planetary dimension, because this struggle itself is universal in itself. But people struggling, they are struggling for concrete issues. They don't know the other struggling. And the link, maybe, is a strategic thing to do. But it's learning from this. It's not imposing our ideas for them.
Thanks, Candido. I think that this is a good transition point to Lina Lee. Lina Lee's from China with the Green Innovation Hub. And she's their climate policy expert, but we're going to call on her to talk more broadly about what's happening in China. And I think, Candido, you raise a lot of critical questions about biocivilization and local struggles. And I think it's important to go to a different part of the world like China, where civil society formation is very different than in, say, Brazil and in other parts of the world. And Lina, I wonder if you can comment a bit on what what's relevant from what Candido is saying in the Chinese context. Just this morning I woke up and I saw an article online that said China is the second largest importer of rice this year. And it's gone from second to the seventh. I mean, from seventh to second this year, which has huge implications for things. And even though it is the largest producer of rice. So I was wondering if you could maybe comment a bit on what are the most pressing issues that you see facing China in the next 3 years, and this project of thinking about biocivilization in China, how people are dealing with these changes, how the government is thinking about these issues, and how are CSOs engaging with that? And yeah, thanks.
I'm very honored to join this panel and to give some feedback. Actually, I feel a lot of association with what Candido mentioned, especially around this is not just a reforming in the sense, it's more of a transformation. And I think I need some more time to actually get more hands-on what this new concept means. But in my mind, at least, we need a fundamental transformation of China's development model to be more equitable and more sustainable and climate resilient. That's important for everyone living in China, and I think it's also important for the world. As Candido also mentioned, there's a group of emerging economies like China who's in the crossroad of whether going this way or there is alternative that more from developing countries can follow. So I think that's very important. And I could also associate with what he said about how you actually consume. That's a big issue. I think that's one of the most pressing issues that the CSOs in China need to start to think and strategize on how we address it in the consumerism and the materialism that has been driven by the economic development policies and the overall environment. You know, when the American dream becomes Chinese dreams, then the lifestyles and also gets to be our dreaming way of how a good life means. Big house, big cars, consuming a lot with not limit, and that means happiness. So I think this is also something we need, but that's actually going far away from Chinese tradition. So I think, as he mentioned, there's a lot of things that indigenous people and traditions actually value, and we kind of moving further from that. And we need to rethink that if we can get something from ancient, from our ancestors, from our traditions that can incorporate it in our modern life and make it even more civic. So these are the things. But regarding the way the civil society operates, I can from his explanation, I can see that there was a lot of confrontation. And in China, there are two types. It's I have a dream, like I have a good wish, and I find a cooperative way to do it with different people, including government, including business. And there is also I have a nightmare where we need to go more confrontational approach. This happens in parallel in China. And among the approach of the civil society's intervention in our transformation. And I think that we will continue to work on, most of the civil society members are now working on, at least in the climate field, because that's my background, is working more on fighting against the dirty energies and promoting more renewables and new energies, and also focusing on the urban area, because as of last year, we already have more than half of the population in China living in urban area. But I think there are more emerging issues that we need to look at. The consumerism is one, but also we need to start to look at the urban area. As you mentioned, the food security has been struggles and top priorities for the government since the beginning of it, because such a big country and big nation is never easy, and it's getting more difficult because the international food market is so interlinked, and our independency on the external market making us much more vulnerable. So, and that hurts the very local people. And another issue that is in the climate field, we are lagging behind of adaptation and resilience debates. Actually, yesterday back to hotel, I watched the CNN about the Sandy, and it's the photos and the videos reminds me of the big storm in Beijing, and it looks really similar. This year in summer we have the storm that has been the 60th years high storm in Beijing, and it takes away I think more than 20 people's lives. That's real, and so this resilience building both in the urban areas and in the rural areas is very crucial. And good thing is that the central government started to build the adaptation into our overall strategy, and there is a national adaptation plan working on. But I think adaptation is really should to be more bottom up. So you need to engage provincial level government, lower level villages, cities, and also the local people to bring up the real solutions, because you cannot break down the targets top down. Different areas need to work on their different solutions. So these are some of my reflections.
We're going to start to move towards some of these issues about how do we connect with what Candido is saying, struggles on the ground that are very specific to what policy advocacy groups are doing, which is sometimes actually at a very high level. And maybe before we move on to Katrine, maybe you can comment a little bit on how do you see that happening? Because there are a lot of local struggles happening in China. There was a village that actually said, no, we're not giving away this land. And so how are policy think tanks and advocacy groups trying to connect to these struggles and feeding back and learning from that in the advocacy work?
I must say this kind of local struggles you mentioned is more of it's less driven by civil society and more driven by the very people on the ground who actually suffer. For example, there's also big protest against the chemical plant in several cities or towns in China, and they have been a big demonstration on the street, and very local people, not organized by NGOs. So there has been also debate among NGOs on what are our roles, because there is also new tools like internet that can make the normal citizens, participate and voice their concerns more directly. So I think this is, we haven't found an answer yet, but we think we need to associate with this kind of local struggles more directly, less reactively, and to see how we can link them together. But and I'm also open to some input maybe from you guys on how we can do that, because originally, as you mentioned, we work at Beijing, in Beijing and at very top superficial level, and now there is bottom-up struggle, and we try to link that.
Katrine, let's turn it over to you then. Katrine Gutmann, I think for the longest time in your work life you've worked for WWF, but you've left the organization and have now consulted a variety of others like the European Climate Foundation. And you're a long-standing activist and lobbyist and advocacy person in the climate movement, or in the climate NGO community. What are your experiences both in that same question, like how can we root better to what's going on the ground, but also, I mean, we're here together to cooperate it in ways internationally. For one, which we can do very well at the different international forums, like the UNFCCC or the Committee on Food Security, but also maybe beyond or beside those international forums, we want to better and more closer work together as NGOs, as civil society organizations. Now, what are the kind of struggles, hurdles, challenges that we face when we want to campaign sort of transnationally? Maybe you can, with your experience, you can give us some insights on these questions.
Yeah, so the caveat really is that I have a climate background. So, and I actually think that, listening to yesterday, that the food and agriculture community has a lot to share, and that the climate community can learn from. Because the climate community, and we've said that, and we said yesterday, is very policy focused. The international networks were very much focused on international processes. And with that, it's very science focused, and with that also very top down. So the networks that we have are organized around that. The conclusion I've come in the last years, and I hear many people echo that, is that we have to put a lot more effort into the area of mobilization and campaigning, but the climate community, at least the mainstream, is actually not fit to do so, and because of its policy focus. And the networks for it are also policy focused. So, I think there are two areas one needs to look at in order to address this. One is really what kind of topics does the climate community address? by focusing on the UNFCCC, it actually isn't a topic that is good for mobilization and campaigning. So you actually need to open up to topics that connect with all the way to the struggles down. I mean, there are several layers between that. And then there's the question of how you organize yourself so you're actually able to connect with grassroots or with struggles. So on the topic side, at least from conversations I've been in the last months, it's definitely the whole area around impacts and risks is one. And you've just mentioned that. I don't think we are organized internationally in a way to be able to help each other with that. I don't think it necessarily needs global strategies. I think that is a topic that you can organize country by country and then you network across. But there's a great opportunity around the impacts and risks work, not only because catastrophes are happening, if you want to call those opportunities, but also because the IPCC Fifth Assessment Report is coming, where you could say that is creating a sort of a global moment around which we can just use that in order to advance the topic and to politicize the issue. And that would be a question also to the food and agriculture people here. Is the Fifth Assessment Report also for your work a moment that you can use for the food agenda, yes or no? Because I would think that climate impacts and risks is actually quite connected with the food security debate.
Can you maybe make it a little bit more concrete, impacts and risks? And I mean, it would be perfect to link that to the food and ag issue, but or some other concrete example how that would be appropriate to link down through the various levels?
Well, on impacts and risk, others can maybe give examples. I think another topic that lends itself for much more campaigning mobilization is the whole work around fighting the fossil fuel complex and climate investments. And also there, what you would try to do is to have national campaigns, not necessarily, in my view, organizations of campaigning of 150 organizations per country, but you actually try to have a smaller set where you have youth organizations, you have campaign organizations working together with policy organizations that cooperate in a smaller setting. Because I think if you try to do campaigning in a 150 organization setting, the transaction costs are very high and you cannot focus very much. So you rather try to create centers of smaller groups of organizations with diverse roles that respect, yes, you are an organization that's very good in grassroots. I have policy to contribute, and we cooperate. And these actually, you have them in different countries, and then they are in touch with each other. Because I think the tendency in a lot of networks, I think, at least on the climate side, is then to focus all those efforts on international issues rather than on transnational issues and cooperating across countries. Another challenge is that, of course, we have mostly policy organizations. So how can policy organizations help grassroots? WWF is not a campaign or mobilization organization, clearly not. But it knows policy. So at one time, what WWF did is it had some money it could fundraise. So it used some of its money and gave it to some grassroots organizations, and they did anti-coal work, local anti-coal work. And WWF would then, in that case it was the Philippines, would provide some of the policy insights that the grassroots organizations lacked. So there are some very practical ways of how organizations can work together. The thing is that a lot of organizations don't take the time to actually sit down and think through, okay, so we are a policy organization, but how could we help on the side of mobilization without turning into a mobilization organization ourselves? But there are actually ways, and most of our organizations are so busy thinking about the policy or the strategy of achieving this or that, not thinking about the how and how to actually increase the capacity in order to campaign or to do grassroots. So we don't have those centers of innovation of how to do it.
I think, thank you, Katrine, for that. And I think this is a good segue to open it up. In the last couple of days, we've had a lot of conversations. I've had conversations with Miriam and Mersha, who are in the crowd here, and they've been saying, that there's a real disconnect between, at least for the climate and agriculture groups, in the way that we talk about what's happening on agriculture, adaptation, mitigation, what are the challenges, what are the struggles, to actually make it relevant for the struggles on the ground in Africa. And so maybe you guys could come in and weigh in on, what work do policy groups have to do? And totally agree with this idea of having a division of labor, but also the fundamental aspect of that is actually trust building between social movements and policy wonks and think tanks and so maybe some people can come in on that. Pablo and I were having a heated conversation about that yesterday. So lots of hands.
Great. We see hands rising. Dirk, you have the microphone, or other use the table microphone?
So I don't know if Mersha or Miriam want to come in, or you want to come in later, and we can call on. Yeah, okay. So who was first? I saw a hand over there.
Yeah, Kaas. Please go ahead. It's within the table, right?
Okay. Yeah, thanks a lot. Having worked with Katrin, obviously some of her thinking resonates with me, but also with in terms of the recent things we have seen happening in the US. Obviously, that hurricane was, it was a local event, local in the sense that it had impact on the eastern US, but it was a global media event as well. And the interesting bit here is that we need to seize these moments. And I see for the first time that at least the US climate movement is seizing the moment and is connecting the dots between the fossil fuel complex and what it's doing, and it's holding Exxon accountable for this superstorm. So it connects the dots between between coal, between the fossil fuel companies, and between what's happening. And I think we need, in that sense, I would not see, the next global moment being the next IPCC report, but I see the next major impact upon people's livelihoods and lives being the moment where we unite around the same agenda. And I think this is exactly where the people working on food and agriculture will be joining up with the people fighting the fossil fuel complex and working on climate change in one common agenda. And so I think let's prepare our thinking and prepare our minds. How do we connect the dots between scarcity of food crisis in major countries, major climate catastrophes, and the fossil fuel complex, which is causing the whole problem?
Thank you.
And maybe you can also just introduce yourself.
Exactly. So this was Jörg Haas, who has long worked for the Heinrich Böll Foundation, is now with the European Climate Foundation. I will not know that for everyone in the room, so please give a short indication. And this was rather a statement, which is totally fine, but you can also involve our audience, and you also have to give us a note when you want to enter and reply. So who's next?
Thank you very much. My name's Salimul Haq. I'm I have been for the last 12 years with the International Institute for Environment and Development in London. I've now moved to Bangladesh, where I'm from originally, and setting up a new international center for climate change and development. And my work has been mainly in the climate change arena, particularly on adaptation. But I'd like to share the experience that we have now in Bangladesh. Bangladesh has developed a climate change strategy and action plan, which has 6 major pillars, 2 of which are energy and agriculture, and the third is food security. So under the climate change program, they have made these linkages. And at the country level, there are many, many different actors from the grassroots level to the national who are making these linkages as we speak on the ground. And I would argue that no other country is moving as fast forward on this issue as Bangladesh. The levels of awareness on this issue are very high. It's not perfect, we have problems with governance and corruption and so on, but within that constraint, the idea of this issue is rising so high from the Prime Minister down to the local people. Climate change is on people's consciousness, and it is being incorporated into the daily activities that they're doing from food and agriculture and transport, etc. So I would argue that one of the things that we might want to think about in terms of this great transformation is thinking of new actors. The people who got us in this problem aren't the people who are going to take us out of this problem. The countries that got us in the problem aren't the ones that are going to take us out of it. So let's look for new countries that are forging a path forward, even if it's imperfect. Rather than criticize them, look at them as champions. And I would argue that on climate change in particular, Bangladesh is way ahead of other countries. In fact, there was an interview on CNN. Michael Oppenheimer gave an interview to Christian Amanpour on Sandy in New York, and he said that Bangladesh is much better prepared than New York was. So Bangladesh should be sending experts to New York to tell them what to do. And I'm not being facetious. I am being serious.
Great.
Thank you. Lily Voer, I work with the Heinrich Böll Foundation. I've heard Candido and several others spell out a common vision of where we want to go, and I really appreciate that. But I'm wondering if we actually take that vision seriously in our work. Because if we think of that vision as being one that is reclaiming the commons and is completely changing the economic principles of our system, then when we look at the instruments and mechanisms that we're facing right now, that we're working with, market mechanisms, carbon trading as the central one, then I think if we're taking our vision seriously, we need to more fundamentally oppose those, which I don't see happening in the whole community, or I think we need to have that conversation now and not pretend that we just, can try and improve the mechanisms, thinking that sometime in the very far away future we'll reach a vision that's completely different. So I'm just wondering what people think of that, especially those who've spelled out that vision. Like, what does it mean? How do you then try and implement that now? How do you get there? How do you change the economic principles? How do you protect the climate by reclaiming the commons? So how to get from here to there, and what does it mean for the concrete policies we're working with in the real world? Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, maybe we want to gather 1-2 more comments and then hand it back.
So there's Uchita in the back,
Great.
and then...
Okay, please go ahead.
Early morning, I'm sorry to say I'm rather disappointed through the 2 days, and my disappointment basically is to say at least we have a day of discussing transformation, and I don't think transformation is about tinkering around policy reform. Policy reform has taken us nowhere from Rio 1992 to Rio +20, and civil society was a part of the crime group of tinkering around a given agenda and Rio +20. And last week in New York was a display of the fragmented civil society rushing into the next big thing around the UN beyond 2015 and trying to create their own empires. My aspiration coming to Bonn after 4 days at home from New York was to engage in a dialogue of transformation which requires radical reform, radical change, not just reform. And I think I'm grateful to Candido for touching. But this dialogue needs to go beyond touching. Number one, we have not addressed the fragmentation of the so-called group inside this room. I would appreciate that this group talks about how and the mechanisms and strategies to come in together, leaving our territorial comfort zones aside and strategizing for the next few hours as to say, we know what the problems are. We have analyzed this for past 20 years. We know what the governments are doing and not doing. We know the corporations being the enemy, if that is the case. But enemy within ourselves of not working together is a much serious problem that this forum needs to address. Believe me, if we leave Bonn without addressing this, we will be more disappointed than before coming here. This is an ideal forum, and I plead that this forum does not lose this opportunity.
Thank you. This is a great comment, thank you, but just from the side of the organizers, I mean, of course we can have different opinions on how radically and how far we want to reform our systems, and I think there are different opinions here, but what we definitely wanted to focus is on the strategies. That means on the next steps we can go together, right? So, I mean, we might differ in the end goal, but what we want to find here on common ground is for the couple of next steps that we can take. Who else?
Hafizur Rahman from Terry, India. I just want to draw attention to a couple of areas. One is that of late, a lot of civil society movement has been centered around conflicts and on issues which are fundamental to democracy and fundamental to the rights of the people. With this background, I think in countries such as India, where there is a lot of infrastructure development taking place and many power sector development happening, where land is being taken from the poorest of the poor and land acquisition is a major issue. What is seen is that civil society movements are coming up in a way where they are working closely with the community. So in terms of connecting the dots, I think what is essential is a more integration of the civil society itself in tackling some of these issues. And that integration needs to happen not so much on macro issues, but on local issues. And the importance in terms of connecting the local issues such as land acquisition, which is sort of a bill is pending in the parliament and where people are becoming more and more vocal. But the connect of the local community to the larger implications of such processes, such as land acquisition on climate, and the fact that a lot of land is being acquired for bringing up coal-based thermal power plants. So there is a global connect which is already existing, but that global connect is not really translated to the local concerns and problems. And civil society in this scenario can play a very critical role in channelizing the thought process and channelizing these movements. A lot of the agenda, for instance, in India, more recently has been usurped by the anti-corruption movement, which did try to bring civil society on a singular platform. But there are much more burning issues, which of course are again rooted in governance, in corruption, etc. But the local and the global connect that the civil society, it is an opportunity which if the civil society loses at this juncture, then I don't think in the near future we will get such an opportunity again. So that is something which we need to draw our attention to. Thank you.
Okay, I think, well, we have 5 minutes left, and I'd like to give the panelists 1 minute to respond to whatever they would like based on the feedback we've gotten, and then I'll just have some closer. Candido, do you want to start?
Oh, it's a lot of questions. Maybe in the groups we can discuss more. I personally, I think market mechanism is a fundamental wrong way of going further. Maybe it's the only thing possible in this situation when the big corporations are controlling everything, not only by business, but controlling the power. The state, national states, and the main multilateral organizations. So, in looking from territories, the market mechanism like carbon trade is a main challenge for the people living there, because their territories must be not touched to prevent this base of this trade. So it's seen, if you go to Amazon, in general, not all, there are some people doing that, but in general, they will say, we must be against this, coming from this. So I think what we need, all this we do is needed, but how to rebuild our concerns, our commitments for change, and make things work better, like advocacy work, or what you do, for example, is important. I'm not saying it's not important. It's needed in some ways. But we need to reestablish a learning process. We don't know where to go. We must establish some principle for us and build a way together. So learning process is an inclusive process. The main are the people living the problems. It's not exactly us. We are part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. So let's learn with the others how to build that. It's like find the glue. I'm talking from yesterday, find the glue that can link all these so local communities that must continue to be local, because our globe is unique in some ways, and our society also depend on the local possibilities. Diversity is a fundamental principle on that. For everything, and respecting diversity, there are no one solution for that. And I personally will say, maybe we can be more effective in this world level, planetary level, we have better foundations. But coming from there to down is impossible way.
Okay. I follow from you start with on the carbon market. I think there is one common issue we face is when we talk about the same term, we don't mean the same. So we need to find more time among each other to define what we are saying and to define common understanding. And then the next step is the common objective and approach. And also regarding the carbon market, we know there are fundamental flaws about it, but as civil society, especially in China, we are looking for not only finding the problems, but also we need to provide alternative. And that links me to a very interesting example from Bangladesh. Actually, I hope I have more time with you in person later on, because I think the good thing about this crowd, and when we talk about all the connections, one important connection we need to make is to collect to the best practices and to the good things already happen each everywhere on the ground and scale up in our own place with our own expertise and link them up, because only then we can ground the roots of what we're looking for, rather than just block the opposite side. I think we need to grow our side bigger and scale up the good things so that we can really build to the vision that you showed to us.
I think the disconnect that we have between those that work on policy and grassroots is also because policy people work on certain topics that don't resonate with those that work on grassroots, and hence then also I think if policy organizations open up more to working with grassroots, the topics and the solutions they'll be advocating will be a different one. I'm pretty sure they would become more radical. So I think policy organizations will actually really have to sit down and think through how can we connect better and really listen, and then their agendas will change too. And I don't think we take the time. We don't have the spaces for it. We also don't think the whole world of, and you mentioned internet and the digital activism. I think many of us don't really know how to work with that. And just an example that I know from Greenpeace, just mentioning again, you've created a digital activism lab, right? And actually creating a center of innovation within your organization, but it's not just centered, the way I understand, not just centered on Greenpeace, but also working with activists outside of the Greenpeace circle. And so you're opening up and just thinking of crazy stuff and what could be done and really innovating there. And I don't think there are many organizations that have that. And we as a community have that, and we need to create that.
Too many mics. I think that's a great note to end on. I think we take your challenge seriously, Uchita, and this is a good opportunity for us to begin the day and to go back to our groups and to think about where are we within that group, and are we able to do that listening and come to looking at how do we build that trust? How do we do that collaboration? One of the core goals for this dialogue was to figure out how do we begin to collaborate. And that necessarily means that we deal with the challenges that have prevented that kind of collaboration. So I hope everybody has the energy to get back to their groups and begin to deal with some of these challenging questions. And I look forward to hearing back from everybody. Thank you so much. And thanks to the panelists.